There were dust storms. We had cots that were, barely wide enough and barely long enough for an adult.
The British had been given responsibility for Iraq's second city, Basra, and 3 adjoining provinces in the far south.
Yeah, that fire's still burning over on the front. I'm surprised they've not put them out yet. Yeah. I'm surprised it's not gone out. It's been burning for 21 days.
Like Baghdad, there was looting on a scale the British had not remotely planned for, and even if they had done, wouldn't have had enough troops to stop it anyway.
Everybody's stealing it from the national stores, so we're a bit helpless to stop them at the moment, because if you notice how many cars are going through with this stuff, you ask them, is it stolen? They're like, yes, Alibaba's. It's natural now that the Iraqi government have gone. If we arrested them, by the end of the day, we'd have 2,000 people and a mountain of grain.
Basra is a city the size of Birmingham. The Iraqi police had melted away. With just 61 Royal Military Police, the British Army couldn't hope to take over their duties.
At the moment, a sort of stealing and looting frenzy going on. Anything that isn't sort of tied down or locked away, they'll just nick it.
Like his American counterpart, the British Defence Secretary considered the looting of little consequence.
It does appear, fortunately so far, to be confined to Iraqi citizens. Shall I use the word liberating those items that are in the charge of the regime, going into the former facilities of the regime, to the secret organizations, and redistributing that wealth amongst the Iraqi people. So I regard such behavior perhaps as good practice, but that is not to say that we should not guard against more widespread civil disturbances.
Like the Americans, the British were finding every Iraqi problem, from law and order to the supply of basic services, had become their problem. As Colin Powell had earlier warned the president, if you break Iraq, you'll have to fix it. In London, Charles Tripp got another last-minute request, this time from a British colonel who'd just arrived in Basra.
He got in contact with me. He was saying, could I recommend anything in terms of Iraqi legal profession or the legal codes of Iraq? What was the law? I mean, quite understandably, he was a military lawyer, and he knew he'd have to help in the administration of an occupied country. And so therefore, to know something about the legal structure and the codes of the law itself was hugely important.
Never mind keeping law and order, the British were struggling to ensure basic services. 3 weeks after the invasion, most of Basra's 1.3 million residents were still without safe drinking water.
Okay.
The situation is difficult.
Let me explain. The situation is very difficult.
Yes.
Firstly, with the water, you're correct. The water engineering works aren't working. Okay.
Only now were the British and Americans learning just how fragile Iraq's infrastructure had become after a decade of UN sanctions and more than 3 decades of Saddam Hussein.
I hadn't realised how bad it was until I got to Baghdad. I mean, Iraq had been under Saddam Hussein for 36 years. I mean, he'd 3 times as long as the German people had been under Hitler. The place was held together by chicken wire and chewing gum. It was incredibly bad. So even though I was concerned, I should have been a lot more concerned if I'd known the reality. I think there was a fair bit of wishful thinking going on.
But why was all this such a surprise to the British and Americans, when before the war other countries had embassies in Baghdad and were just a phone call away?
It's a question I ask myself a lot. Could we or should we have had a better understanding of the way in which Iraq was working, the way in which the infrastructure was working, the way in which the Ba'athist Party was working, who were the key people, could we have known, should we have known more about that? I think you can argue that we should. I mean, I think that if we had taught more to those who were there, the French and others, we might have had a better understanding of the way in which Iraq worked under Saddam Hussein and therefore might work after a military conflict.
In Baghdad, the heat was burning up what Iraqi goodwill there was from being liberated. The failure to provide electricity and water was stoking anti-American feeling. When the head of the British Army arrived, he got a full and frank briefing.
Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, that's what I called the briefing. And I've worked with General Jackson a lot over the years, and he got pretty irritated pretty quickly because he didn't like what he was hearing.
The immediate goal of the invasion, regime change, had been achieved. But there was no plan for the future, and the clock was ticking.
You've got about 100 days to start making a difference at this point.
You mean you win or lose it in 100 days?
Well, that again is pretty black and white, but you either start to get people thinking, yeah, the future is going to be better, or maybe not thinking that.
From his vantage point on the staff of the US Land Forces commander, General Albert Whitley had already